there's a difference between being legendary or a legend and leaving a legacy. Something that is legendary got a finite shelf life. It'll resonate with you, and perhaps you'll pass it along to somebody that I will never meet. And it'll go on, and then it becomes legacy. Because legacy goes on and on. But when I quit telling the stories, the legend will die because there's nobody else telling it. It's like planting a seed. When you plant a seed, there's two ways that seeds get planted. You either plant them deliberately so that you can get a certain kind of flower, tree, but the other kind of seed planting happens by chance. Seeds are carried by the wind, by insects, by birds, and then they start to grow. Now, we have the privilege of planting seeds every time we speak. And that includes at home, by the way. And so every time we have an opportunity to touch somebody's life, we may be planting a seed. One good question is, what kind of seeds are you planting? What kind of story are you living that people can look at and say, that's congruent? Because if we're not congruent, people see through us. And so we ask those kinds of questions. What can I do to ensure that the life I live is helping me build a legacy that is full of energy, enthusiasm, and relevance? Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon. I suppose good morning if you're coming out in from other parts of the world, and certainly good afternoon for many of us here. And welcome. Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Dune and Friends. Today we have a wonderful friend joining us. We have Susan Luke Evans joining us from the Toronto area. Susan Luke Evans is a leadership consultant and communication expert. She is among the 8% of the Canadian speakers within the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers to hold the highest earned designation, the Certified Speaking Professional, CSP. And among less than 1% within Global Speakers Federation to hold the Global Speaking Fellow designation. Prior to starting her speaking business, Susan was the CEO of a financial services support company, and where she executed a 5-year startup plan in 3 years, distributed dividends and year ahead of schedule, and 1 year ahead of schedule, and led a subsequently highly successful merger. Her practice centers on assisting leaders who want to elevate their messages to create flexible and engage in agile workplaces, and in a process maximize their return on investment, ROI. Now, she believes that everyone should live a great story and to build their legacy. She serves clients in over 50 countries on 6 continents. She has held numerous leadership positions in national and international professional philanthropic organizations. Now, Susan brings to her clients a unique combination of genuine expertise and powerful practical ideas, positive approach, and irreverent sense of humor that garner rave reviews from all around the world. Friends, help me in welcoming our wonderful guest today, Susan Luke Evans. Good afternoon, Susan. How are you doing today, my friend?
Thank you for inviting me, Dune.
Wonderful, wonderful. So tell us a bit more about your background, though. How did you get to this point? There's been a lot of different career journeys and whatnot. Give us a little bit of an expanded background before we get into things.
I often joke that I have a checkered past, but I started my professional life as a school teacher. I taught in very remote indigenous villages in Alaska. So that was probably more of an education for me than it was for the children that I taught. I taught at one time or another every grade, and sometimes there are usually more than one grade at a time in a room. And then I moved from Alaska, and where there's, in those villages, there was no TV, no telephone, no running water part of the time. Sometimes the school provided housing, and other times had to find our own accommodations. So we lived in a log cabin with, 2 rooms and a path. Mm-hmm. And so it was pretty primitive at some points, and it was awfully cold and awfully dark for awfully long. And so I moved from there with my son, who was a small child at the time, and we moved to Honolulu, which I figured I deserved to move to Honolulu after
Aloha.
after several years in the woods. And so I had a brief time I was a director of admissions for a small private school in Honolulu. And then I decided that I wanted to be in the business world. I didn't really know what that meant at the time. And I had an interesting process of learning to write a resume, since all I had done is teach school. And, you don't really want to I know how to color and paste and cut, that didn't look real good on a business type resume, but I figured it out. And I got a job working with financial institutions in Honolulu, or in the whole state, actually, of Hawaii. And so it was after that there was a group of these financial institutions that wanted to have automated teller machine access in terms of a network. So for whatever reason, they asked me to be the CEO of this startup operation. And I didn't know anything about being a CEO. I didn't know anything about ATMs and networking. All I knew was how to talk and how to do a little bit of negotiation and to present something to boards of directors that they might be interested in. So that was my job. I had to negotiate contracts, both regional and national. And I had to go around and speak with boards of directors of financial institutions and say, don't you want to join us in this lovely startup thing? And wonder of wonders, some of them did. So we started this company, and it grew, and then I had to hire staff, and there's a whole bunch of stories that go along with that. But at any rate, after, as you said in the intro, after about 3 years, we had already done what we thought would take 5 years. So that was good. And I figured, if I'm ever going to start my own business, now is the time, while everybody's happy and things are going well. And so there was a larger organization that wanted us to merge with them. So we went through that whole mergers and acquisitions process. And then I said, this is good enough. I'm going to start my own business. And that's what I did. And started working with organizations and corporations, both small and large, actually, primarily in Hawaii to start with, but pretty soon I was traveling, and then I moved back to the mainland and continued to speak and consult, and I wrote a book, and most recently I've written another one, and so here I am today. And how did I get to Toronto? Well, I fell in love. And so I came to Canada, and I've been here for 15 years, and I think I'm going to stay.
So work have taken you to Honolulu, wonderful Honolulu, and yet love has taken you to Canada. So Well, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Susan. And it just reminds me of you can never really predict your career path or even your personal life path, right?
Yeah,
Things come up and life evolves, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wouldn't have it any other way,
Yeah.
quite
Well,
frankly.
wonderful. Yeah.
I moved around as a child and with the family. So, I guess I'm part gypsy.
Gypsy. You were global long before global was a term.
Well, you're always better off out of your own backyard sometimes. So,
Yeah, yeah. As they say, travels do make you appreciate the world, but also make you appreciate home even more when you come
absolutely.
home, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Now we're going to fast forward to even, in fact, let's go to the present day. I know you just done a big conference just last few days here. Tell us about what you're up to during COVID here with some of the virtual events and whatnot. Give us a bit of a
Well,
rundown on that.
when COVID came along, I had been working. I worked in January and February and in actually in the States. Um, and then COVID came. Um, and we couldn't travel and all of that. So I decided that I needed something to sort of keep me out of mischief. And I had started writing a book, oh gosh, years ago. And, life happened and the book or the manuscript got put on the shelf. And so I thought, well, maybe I could work on that and actually get it published. So I needed to redo it and refocus it because, it had been, it'd been a while since I wrote it originally. And, that's what I did. And, just in November, it was published, and has on Amazon become an international bestseller. So that's kind of exciting. Yeah, who knew? I have no idea how that happened, quite frankly. But
You did the work. You did the work.
well, there was a lot of other people. I just wrote the book, and there was a whole lot of other work done by other folks. But so that's what kept me busy, pretty much up to now. And as you said, I've participated in several virtual conferences, and I've done a few workshops virtually. It's a new world in terms of that. I miss the people, but other than that, I'm quite happy with where I am and who I am and what I'm attempting to do, and so I'm looking forward to when lockdown is over and vaccinations are done and we can travel again. Although I don't think it'll ever go back to the way it was. I think it'll be something we're not quite sure what yet, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. We are certainly evolving in some fluid times for sure. Thank you for sharing that. And the book, I'm going to maybe just bring in just the screenshot of the book on your website here, just so we get a sense of.
Oh, I can hold one up if you like.
Oh, you bet. Please do.
I got it right here.
Hold on. Let me make it so that there you go. Let me get rid of this here. Yeah, that's wonderful. Fantastic.
Well, the interesting part is that, up here is wherever it is, I can't do it right. I always go backwards on this. Anyway, at the top, there's the little thing that says it's an international bestseller. But this particular thing down at the bottom, I'm on the wrong side, right there. That is a what they call a marker. And the publisher that I used introduced what's known as augmented reality. And so that's been around for a long, long time, but not in terms of books. So this publisher, a Canadian organization that is international, introduced it. And I was one of the first authors to take advantage of it. And basically what you have to do, and there's information about it on the first page of the book, you download an app and then you hold your phone or over the marker, when you're on the app, and then a video of me pops up saying, "Welcome to my new book," which is kind of cool.
Nice.
So it's, it needs refining, I'm sure, but I was excited to be able to try it, and so anybody that gets the book, that's on the cover, and the app is free, and so you have me live and in color talking a little bit about the book as an introduction.
There you go. There you go.
That's kind of cool.
Book signing is so yesterday.
Thank you. Yeah, well, it is, and especially now when you can't actually hand a book to somebody. So
yeah,
it's a little bit. It's a whole different world. But I was excited. I don't write children's books, but I think that people that write children's books with this technology, how cool would that be for kids, right? And they could animate it, and the characters or the whoever is in the book could sort of come to life, and I just think that would be so cool.
Yeah. So again, we have to be very mindful that the power of the book is not necessarily in the paper. The power of the book is in the content and the personality and the insights and the stories. And you're all about stories. We're going to get into that for sure. So as we evolve and trying to, again, reach new audiences and younger people and who are very much into the technology, how can we factor all of those things in rather than just keeping book the way it's always been for hundreds of years, just paper and paper and paper and nothing, nothing else augmenting it, as you mentioned.
Yeah, well, certainly this technology is something that I think people will. I don't know, I don't know how long it will last, quite frankly, in terms of that. But it's a nice value add in terms of a little bit something just a little bit different. I personally believe that, we're never going to not have books. And you can tell by all this behind me, this is one of multiple bookcases in my house that are all full. And then they're spilling over onto the floor. So I'm a real book fan. Mm-hmm. But if they're not well written, then that's a whole different conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And as you indicated, I'm really all about stories. So this particular book, while it is a business book and there is a model within the book about how to influence people and elevate your message so that they're influenced in a positive and sustainable way, it's supported by a myriad of examples and case studies and stories of people that I have worked with over the years in all parts of the world, and how that manifests itself in terms of the actual model that I talk about in the beginning of the book. So there's lots and lots of interesting things and that people can write about. I have dreams of one day writing a novel, but I have no idea how to do that. So that's a whole nother project.
There you go. More learning on the horizon. Learning is, as you mentioned, is a good thing. So thank you for sharing that. Again, folks, the book is Return on Influence, the new currency for leaders. And folks, if you're watching and if you are enjoying this conversation here, do chime in the comment section there. And if you comment right in the video there, we'll be able to see it and feature your comment, and we'll be able to have Susan interact and respond to your questions and comments. So thank you for sharing that. Tell us about story. I did mention stories just now as being one of your big things. When did you discover or committed to the idea that stories are fundamental to life and to communication? And could you tell us a story of how you came to that?
How you came to that insight? Stories, dude. Don't get me started. We'll be here till the cows come home. But well, I think my mom was a career woman before it was fashionable, and she was a speaker. She she did a lot of things that, she was well ahead of her time. I'll just put it that way. And she was quite a character as well, but she always used stories. And my dad was minister, so he used stories in his sermons. So, the family teases me and often say that I was born saying once upon a time. So whether that's true or not, we don't know. But stories have always been something that I've been exposed to, and they were just sort of part of my DNA. But I used them. I used them when I taught school. I tried to give examples to the kids and that sort of thing. And then as I transitioned into the business world, I used stories as well. But when I actually started using them consciously, I guess, and understanding that the power that you can have by leveraging your message with stories came about because of a client. It was a chemical plant in the southern part of the U.S. and the plant had some, had been bought and sold several times, and they weren't a very stable producer. And so they imported, the larger corporation imported a new plant manager that had turned another plant around, but he was from a different part of the world. He was from Western Australia, and they moved him to the southern part of the United States. So he talked fast and kind of soft and used colloquialisms and things like that they didn't understand. And of course, in that part of the world, people, when they talk, it's pretty slow, and it's kind of like, smooth whiskey when people talk. And so they had a real communication problem. Well, I was there doing a series of management development workshops. And so the HR people called me in one day and they said, can you work with our new plant manager and teach him how to tell stories? And I said, yeah, I guess. I've never done that before. And they said, well, you use stories all the time. Every time you're here in the workshops, you're talking about your kid, or you're talking about people that you used to know, or some other business, and you're really good. And so maybe you could help him. And I said, well, I can certainly try. So I did a little research, and I was all set to work with him one-on-one. And then they got kind of cold feet, and they said, we want you to do the whole leadership team all at once, because we don't want him to feel badly. And I was like, oh, okay. So we did this workshop, and, I told him a story about when my son was 3 years old or something. I don't know. It had nothing to do with business, but it had a point about effective communication. And so I told them the story. They loved it. Then we deconstructed it, and we talked a little bit about elements of the story and all of that. And then I just went around the room and I said, okay, here's the deal. Each of you have to share out loud. We're going to go around the room 1 or 2 sentences of a specific idea or concept that you want to communicate, or that you need to communicate to your team this week. And I said, I don't even have to understand it, because I had scientists and engineers and people that, were doing things in that plant that I didn't have a clue about. And so I said, but it can't be general. It has to be specific. So I said, teamwork is good is not what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for something absolutely specific. So I went around the room. They all did that. And then I said, okay, you got 10 minutes to come up with a story, an example. It doesn't have to be long, 2-3 minutes. And we're going to share those stories, and I'm going to comment on them and see if they're good enough to get your point across. Well, Dune, I could have sold tickets. They were fabulous stories. Some of them about their grandparents and some about what happened at the plant earlier in the day, and, just all kinds of different stories. And so that's what started me being more deliberate and more conscious about using stories in a way that helps my clients do what they want to do and communicate more effectively. So the book is full of those kinds of some of those stories that came out of clients like that, and it's kind of fun.
Wonderful. So again, another example of, oftentimes we need to pay attention to what our clients are telling us. We need to pay attention to the client's specific needs. And when we do, and willing and able to evolve, willing and able to go outside of our normal comfort zone, that then we end up, in this case, as your story demonstrated, create something new that we couldn't even imagine. And certainly they couldn't imagine either to the full extent, right?
Yeah, it was sort of like the blind leading the blind to start with, but it's worked out, and it's really helped me as a consultant, as a coach. I work with other speakers sometimes who want to refine or enhance some of the stories that they use, and sometimes even people that are professional in terms of speaking are not magically good storytellers, and so somebody will send me a video or whatever and say, can you help me with this story? And some of them just go on and on and on and on, and I call them exit ramps. They use details that just go, someplace. And so I'm trying to follow that detail, and they're back over here, and it, you miss the connection because you've given people permission to go think about something else that has nothing to do with it. And so sometimes just having an objective person that is not part of that story that can look at it and say, you don't need to say all this. You need to focus here. You need to, do different things. And I've worked with several speakers that, they had their stories were like 12 or 15 minutes long. They just went on and on and on. And we'd get them down to like 3 minutes because of all the extra stuff. Mm-hmm. And when my late husband was alive, he used to say, you need to give people time to let their movie roll in their head. And so you have to have some pauses, not extensive, but you have to let people connect to the story. Because I tell lots of stories about when I was in Alaska, for instance. Mm-hmm. And only once in the entire 30 years that I've been doing this, have I ever had anybody in an audience that lived in Alaska. And that, one time. And so they don't have that same experience. But if the story is well told and the point is understandable, then they will connect it in their brain to whatever their experience is. And that's where you get the connection, and that's where it becomes memorable and repeatable and all those things that stories are supposed to do.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all enjoyed a good movie or two in our days. And when you watch a movie, imagine if the people who were involved were just free to say whatever and do whatever. And the 1 hour and a half, 90-minute movie become 25 hours. Yeah. It has all these details. Is that a better movie? Is that more content rich, or is that a little bit misguided?
Yeah. Well, they have to be based in truth, but you don't have to tell everybody every little, then I put my right sock on and then I put my left, nobody cares about that part unless the point is something about socks. So,
yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned, obviously, for those of you who are in CAPS, the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, you, of course, already know who Susan was referring to. Of course, I'm going to bring in the photo here. And for those of you who are not in CAPS, you will hear a bit of an introduction here of a remarkable man. And this is just one of a few photos that I want to bring in here of, tell us about this fine-looking young man.
Well, that was on a very cold winter day in 2010, and that's when Warren and I were married. And you can see the bride wore black, and you can't really tell in that picture, but uncharacteristically, the groom did not have on a tie. But yeah, it was that's a whole nother story about how we decided to get married, and then there was this big long issue about getting permission to get married because I was not a Canadian citizen at that time. I wasn't even a legal permanent resident, and I couldn't be until Warren married me and could sponsor me because I didn't work in Canada, so I didn't have a job here. And anyway, but that was the day that we got married, and January 7th, 2010.
Yes, of course, just a bit more on Warren for those of you who don't know him. Warren, of course, is really the founding member of CAPS, the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, and really not only a founding member, but really the heart and soul of the organization for so many decades, and loved and respected by many who been helped by his work and his help and his mentoring and whatnot. Just beautiful and great man. And you have had a wonderful journey with Warren there. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, Warren and I had known each other for years. We had seen each other at conventions along the way, and that was when I lived in Hawaii, and of course he was up here, and we were both married to other people. And then over time, I mean, I saw him like once a year, across a crowded room, but I was always very interested in working internationally, and Warren was also in terms of the speaking industry, he was one of the founders and the first president of the Global Speakers Federation. So here was this, international speaker guy that I sort of knew, and so we just saw each other maybe once a year, and then life happened, and I was no longer married, and so I was at a convention in, I think it was 2002, and he was there, and that was at a basketball game, which I had to teach him about. We'll have a whole different story. He taught me about hockey, and I taught him about basketball. But yeah, so we met, and he said, by the way, did you know I'm not married anymore? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And so we started this conversation, and eventually, about 3 years later, I moved up to Toronto, and then it was another 5 years before we got married. So we worked together, we traveled together, we laughed more than we did anything else. We shared our families and our friends, and he was an amazing, amazing man. Gone too soon. He left us in August of 2014, and that was us with my mother, that was her 100th birthday, and Warren had had taken over. We did a big party for Mom starting when she was 90, so every 5 years. And of course, at 100, it was really big, and people came from all over the country and all this stuff. And Warren was always the MC. And he and my mom, you would have thought that they had known each other and had scripted these parties for years because they just played off each other, and she just adored him, and they had more fun. So it was a good thing that we were able to do with my mom, and she lived to be 101. So
Wow.
I had her around for a long, long time. I used to tease her and say, "Mom, you can't die because you're my best source of material," because she was such a character. But eventually, we lose those that we love, and then we live with the lovely memories. So
You bet. And I mean, life is, that's what makes life, memories are even more precious, to know
yeah,
that it's not forever,
yeah.
that life is finite. Human beings, all of us are finite. And, we get to enjoy our time in this world with whoever we choose to spend time with. And thank you for sharing those memories.
You're welcome. This picture was in Scotland. I did a lot of work in Scotland. Actually, before Warren and I got together, and I used to go there. I had a client in the oil and gas industry up on the North Sea in Aberdeen, and I went there for a week every month for 5 years, and did workshops and coaching and consulting, and so it sort of became my second home. And so I have a lot of good friends there still. So I took Warren with me on, well, we'd been on some other trip. I think he was speaking in Ireland or something. And so then we went over to Aberdeen and stayed with these friends. Well, actually the first time we stayed in the hotel where I always stayed when I was working there. And there was a woman that worked at the hotel that had asked me if I had a man in my life, and this was when I first started going there, and I said, "Yeah, there's this guy in Canada," and she said, "Oh, is he a Mountie?" And I said, "No, he's not a Mountie." So when we went back the first time together, we stayed at the same hotel, and her name was Nora, and she came over, and I said, "Nora, this is Warren." And she said, "Oh, the Mountie, the Mountie." And of course I told Warren the story. So we all laughed together, but it was quite fun. And he was probably the furthest thing from a Mountie as anybody I've ever known. But anyway, we had a good time wherever we went. So we were very fortunate.
Fantastic. Again, do you have a story of a travel story that you want to share that might be some insights or wisdom that can be pulled from that, Susan?
Travel story.
Yeah, all of your international travels. Was there a story that was memorable that you want to bring up?
Well, well, yeah, I guess there's really quite a lot of different things that happen when you travel. I certainly didn't. I mean, I was always enamored of travel. I always liked to travel, even as a child, but I never really set out to have the opportunities that I ended up having in terms of travel for work. I just feel like I was in the right place at the right time, and that's how it worked out. But in oh gosh, this was probably in like 2017 or somewhere around then. I was doing some work. I had a part of it that was in Vietnam. Oh my goodness, we were at the Cu Chi tunnels.
Oh, really? Well, I was born and raised in Vietnam. Hey.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So the Gucci, of course, that's famous. Wow. I did not know that when I.
Yeah, when we went to in 2005, the first Global Speakers Summit was held in Singapore, and so we went to that. In fact, Warren was the opening keynoter for that event, and I did a couple of breakout sessions and stuff. And then we worked with an event planner in Singapore who did work in Vietnam. So we went as part of a team to do some leadership workshops in Ho Chi Minh City, and they had leadership and sales. So they worked it out. We were there for a week, and the speakers that were talking about sales worked one day, and we did sightseeing that day, and then we would work and do leadership, and they would go sightseeing. And then we had, I think it was one day or something at the end where we could do whatever we wanted. And so that's when we went out to the Kuchi tunnels, and that was me and Warren and the guy in the red shirt, that's Bob Urachuk, who's also a Canadian, and Paul Bridle, who lives here in Toronto, but is actually from the UK. And so the four of us took that time to go out there, and it was extremely interesting and very educational and surprising in many, many ways. But it was Warren went back one time to Vietnam and spoke. I didn't go on that trip, but yeah, we've been to lots of different places for lots of different reasons. But our plan, of course, was to always, when we retired, whenever that was going to be, we were going to go back to some of these places where we'd mostly just worked and hadn't really had a chance to do a lot of sightseeing or anything like that. And so we had a list of places, but we obviously that didn't happen. And that picture was taken probably a week or two before Warren passed. And you can see other speakers that you are familiar with, Nabil Doss and Tony Newman, both from Montreal, and then Annette Pauzet and her husband Sanjay Nath, who live here in Oakville. And they would come. I mean, our house was like Grand Central Station. Warren was diagnosed with cancer in March of 2014, and he passed in that same August. Wow. So the one thing that I was always grateful for was that he had time to say goodbye to people, because there were so many people that cared about him and loved him. And so those folks, Tony and Nabil, drove down from Montreal on multiple occasions. They would drive all the way down here. They would spend the day with Warren, and then they would drive all the way back that same night. And he was just kind of like holding court pretty much every day. And there was always somebody there. And sometimes he was not real cognizant. He was sleeping more than not. I remember one day he sat in that chair. He never opened his eyes, but people talked, and they had these conversations about him and sort of with him, but he never participated. But when something was funny, which was often, he would chuckle. And so he didn't really contribute to the conversation. But when people got ready to leave that day, I said to them, if you want, why don't you just, because, we had no idea, except that we knew it was imminent that he was not going to be with us for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so I said, if you want to say something private to him, please feel free to do that before you leave. Mm-hmm. And so they told me later, to a person, that he said something to each of them. I don't know what he said, mm-hmm. and it didn't matter. I mean, he wasn't talking to me; he was talking to them. Mm-hmm. But they had special moments with him, which was very meaningful for a lot of people who'd known Warren a lot longer than I did, and who had special relationships with him in terms of mentoring and building the CAPS organization and all those kinds of things. So the one thing I was grateful for was that the cancer never damaged his brain to mm-hmm. any degree. So he always knew who people were and all of that. And even the day before he died, his sister and I were on he was in a hospital bed. We had a hospital bed. In fact, they're sitting on his hospital bed, which was in the living room. Mm-hmm. And so he looked up at me. She was on one side of the bed. I was on the other side. And he said to me, he says, I'm on my way out. And I said, yeah, I know, but not today. And he said, how do you know that? And I said, I don't know. I just know not today. Well, I don't know what his sister heard, but she started talking about um, all the people that from their family that had already passed, and it was somebody's birthday, and if he went today, he could just, he could celebrate with them, and they were all waiting for him, and she just got real involved in this whole litany of things, and he looked at me and he kind of winked, and then he closed both eyes, and then he looked up at her with just one eye open, and he said, "Hey, I'm not dead yet." And I just lost it. I was on the floor laughing, and he was chuckling, and then the next morning he was gone, but up until the very end he was his normal irreverent and comical self, and I was grateful for that, and grateful for all the people that he was able to say goodbye to.
Warren Evans, again, deeply loved by all those who have known him and benefited from his mentoring and his really investment of himself. And as you mentioned, he loves having fun, and so he loves smiling, having fun. And so there's a story that I think if somebody wants to do a really fantastic film about how somebody could make such a huge impact on an industry and a group of people who belongs in that, and his peers and his colleagues and his proteges and whatever you want to call them, that would be a great movie to watch.
Well, when they renamed the Spirit of Caps Award to the Warren Evans Spirit of Caps Award, he was actually the first recipient of that award, and so it was appropriate that they renamed it that way. But Tony and Suzanne Stevens came to me and said, would you help us come up with a video presentation that we can use at CAPS every year to introduce that award, so that when it's presented, people understand why it's named for Warren. And I was happy to do that and contribute some pictures and that sort of thing. So every year that gets played at the CAPS convention before whoever wins the award that year is presented with the award. And so there's a little bit of that already done, but I would have to agree with you that the things that he did, and many of them before my time with him, but were very legacy-like, or became legacy in terms of the speaking industry, not just in Canada, but around the world. I mean, I think there's 19 now different associations, national associations around the world. And that's a direct connection to the fact that Warren and some folks from Australia and New Zealand and the US banded together and said, we need to have this international or this global organization so that we can help other countries and other regions in the world that want to have a speakers association. We can be the organization that helps foster those and all of that. And so now they started with 4: New Zealand, Australia, the US, and Canada. And now there's 19. So that's in just over 20 years. So that's a pretty good legacy, in my opinion.
That's fantastic. Of course, that's the Global Speakers Federation, or GSF for short. And and thank you for sharing that. And as far as stories go, there's many stories that I'm sure could be told by many lives that Warren has touched. And so thank you for bringing that out on this conversation.
My pleasure.
Yeah. us a little bit more about the work that you do these days with COVID and the remote. Now, I know you participated in a 3-day conference, just the last 3 days, in fact,
Yep.
yesterday, ended yesterday. What's your thoughts on virtual? I mean, we all love in person. That's granted, but how is virtual working out in your view so far?
Well, I excuse me. I think we're all kind of learning as we go, and some people are faster learners than others. And I would certainly say that you, in terms of what you're doing with this kind of an opportunity to feature people and chat with them and so forth and so on, people that are doing podcasts and the more ambitious ones that are doing conferences, and of course the CAPS just finished a week or two ago their 3-day conference, which was very well done. So I think that we're, as we continue to have to do things virtually, more and more people are becoming educated that way. They're becoming comfortable. I think that when COVID is under control, I won't say over because I don't know what that even means, but I think that we will continue to see virtual events and virtual opportunities within the speaking and training and consulting world, because now, where people used to think, oh, I could never have my employees work from home, well, now they can, or they won't be in business. And so I think it's going to be a hybrid of some sort. We will go back to some live and in color kind of events, but I think we'll also continue with virtual. And as we do that, even people like me that would much prefer to just sit with you in your office and have this conversation, are getting comfortable enough that we can participate at a level that is both professional and helpful. I did the keynote yesterday for the conference was called Fast Track Your Business for 2021. And so there were all kinds of folks that contributed. It was targeted primarily for entrepreneurs in a variety of different industries, not necessarily the speaking industry. But so there were people that talked about what you can and or should be doing in terms of virtual podcasts or conferences. And that picture was the Global Speakers Federation's 20th anniversary. So Nabil Doss, who you see the top of his head there, was the president of the GSF at that point. Jeff Mowat behind him in the white jacket was one of the early presidents of CAPS, and the gentleman to my, I don't know my left from my right, Dune, but anyway, well, they're all bald, aren't they? Let's see. Anyway, the guy in the black suit behind me, Elias, oh goodness, I've lost his last name. Anyway, he was the president then, I think. Maybe Nabil was the immediate past president. It doesn't matter. Anyway, Elias is from New Zealand. The gentleman with glasses and the beige jacket is Lindsay Adams from Australia, who had been a past GSF president, and then John Molador, who is from the U.S. and was at the time the U.S. President. So what they did was they had the current presidents or representatives from each of the 4 founding associations, so New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the U.S. And then they were gracious enough to invite me to the cake cutting as Warren's representative as the founding president. So it was kind of fun. We had the cake was good.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's I mean, I know all these folks. They are just fantastic in their field, and of course, leaders in our association, whether it's the Canada side or USA or other countries, South Africa, and on and on. But
Yeah,
again, the Global Speakers Federation, GSF,
yeah. It's
wonderful.
it's an amazing thing, and the nice thing about them is, I mean, as a member of CAPS, we talk a lot about the CAPS family and how giving people are and willing to help new people and all that. And the interesting thing is that is true of every association, and it is true um, of the federation. So, I don't think twice about contacting somebody in South Africa or India or the UK or whatever to ask them a question, or and they do the same with me and with people in other parts of the world, and it's a very inclusive kind of profession, I think, which is pretty amazing considering how many of us do similar kinds of things, but there's really very little concern about what if they take my story? What if they steal my stuff? And of course, my attitude is if I can't come up with a new story, then I shouldn't be speaking. And so it's never really bothered me. But the other side of that is that people don't steal stories or anything, but they will collaborate and they will cooperate, and it's a pretty special profession, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I've joined CAPS. I think it was 2010, March 2010, and just love the culture that is within CAPS, and just the people there are really, again, wanting to be a contributor to society, wanting to make a difference, wanting to continue to learn their craft, and again, support is just
Yeah.
out of this world. I would
Yeah.
say.
There's not a lot of professional associations that are that giving and sharing, and I've spoken at a lot of them, and they're lovely people. I don't mean that, but in terms of their profession, to actually look at that picture. That was at Raffles in Singapore, at one of the guys who is actually an expat American who lives in Singapore, Ron Kaufman, who is a speaker, and he arranged for everybody that was attending that first Global Speakers Summit to have a banquet at Raffles, which is, a famous hotel. And this was the doorman. And so we all got to have our pictures taken with the doorman. And then, many of us went to the Long Bar and had Singapore sling, which we probably shouldn't have had. But we had it was a.
So tell us, I want to get into, when you think about story and storytelling and whatnot, are there sort of key insights that you want to share with our viewers quickly in terms of what are the typical things that people stumble on when they try to tell a story? Any sort of common mistakes or pearls of wisdom?
Well, in my experience, I think probably the most common mistake is people try to tell too much. And we mentioned that earlier about details that aren't really pertinent to the point you're trying to make. So a story can have more than one point, but it's easier when you're trying to coach somebody or trying to help somebody with their story to tell them to keep it simple, number one, and to really only try to have one point at a time. Otherwise you get too confused, and then your audience is confused and you make no point at all. There are people much funnier than I am. I'm not I'm not a humorist, but there are people that are tell very funny stories. Now I can tell you funny stories. I think the one that I shared earlier about, the day before Warren died and he told his sister he wasn't dead yet and to quit telling him to, move on. That's a funny story. And I can tell it, but there are other people that can tell much, much funnier stories. And if you want a master class in how to tell funny stories, you go to YouTube and you watch anything by Jeannie Robertson.
Mm.
And she is one of the funniest women on the planet, in my opinion. And is, older. She has reinvented herself, in terms of speaking. And, I just love her, but, and I'm not that kind of a speaker. I can tell you things that will amuse you perhaps from time to time, but I usually have a more serious point to make. So I think that trying to tell too much, or taking too much time, even if you only have one point to get there, it's kind of, sometimes I always feel like I'm pulling teeth when I'm coaching somebody to say, come on, get to the point. But it takes practice. And I think people that are good speakers, but not necessarily good storytellers, assume that because they're good speakers, they can tell a good story. Mm-hmm. And it may be a fabulous story, but typically they don't tell it well. And so there are folks that have formulas for that. But the basic formula for almost every story is Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. You start, you run into an obstacle or a problem and you solve it, and then you come back up and you leave them on an upbeat instead of down here wallowing in the, oh my gosh, look what happened to me. So even people that tell very serious stories because of an event that happened in their life, they climbed a mountain, they fell down a mountain, they, whatever it is, have to learn how to tell those stories. People that are writers primarily are not necessarily good storytellers in person, because writing a story and telling it are very different. And you have to have more details when you write, because you don't have any other clues that you can give people, like gestures and tone of voice and pause and all those kinds of things. And if you need to do an accent or anything like that. So my rule of thumb is A, keep it simple. B, watch people that know how to tell a story. Listen to yourself, as painful as that might be. I record every story, either on my phone or something, and listen to it so that I can make sure that the timing is correct, that I can make sure that I pause when I should have, that I have my details in order. And sometimes you forget. I told a story yesterday at that conference, and really the main point that I was trying to make, I forgot to make it at the appropriate time. And I was smart enough to kind of circle back and throw it back in so that I made the point. But if you're not used to doing that, then if that happens to you and you don't know how to do that, then you're stuck, because then people are going, well, yeah, that was nice, but so what? It makes no sense. And then, as much as we don't like to do it, sometimes practice and then practice again and then practice again. Mm-hmm. And my dear friend, Sam Horn, who is well known as both an author and a coach in terms of writing and speaking, her rule of thumb is, don't practice in the mirror. Because when you practice in the mirror, you're looking at yourself.
Right.
And it becomes all about you. And, oh, did I smile right? Did I turn my head right? Did I, and this is not about you. This is about your audience. And this is about what you're trying to do to get your point across or to explain something, whatever it might be. And so practicing and looking at yourself at the same time are not doing you any favors usually. So I never really thought of it that way myself. When I first started, I practiced in the mirror all the time. But when she told me that, I went, oh yeah, that's what I do. And then I think in my brain, right, while I'm on stage, oh, I wonder if I'm smiling at the right time. I wonder if I remember to do this with my hands or whatever it is. And then I get mixed up in my brain. And when I get mixed up in my brain, it shows. And it shows pretty quickly. So keep it simple. Have fun with it. Practice on your dog. Practice on your family, whoever. But practice is really the main key. And get a coach. Get a good friend that my mom always said, oh, that's wonderful. Whenever I'd call her and say, let me run this story by you over the phone. And she was really good, but she was also my mom. And the older she got, the more she was mom instead of the critic. And I really needed her to be the critic. But then I married Warren and he was a good critic. So I got it one way or the other.
Yeah. Now, I do want to just again spotlight the fact that you mentioned that recording yourself on video is very useful, but at the same time, doing the mirror thing is going to be counterproductive in many cases. And I do agree, by the way, because there's a huge difference, in my opinion, between a video camera that you can almost just forget and let it capture it and then be able to play it back when you were in a different mind state and you're not performing, you're not telling the story, and be able to see, oh, that's what the audience sees. I think the video camera is a fantastic tool for that. Yeah. But as you're trying to do the mirror, you basically are splitting your brain between actually telling the story and actually trying to critique yourself at the same time. And just like writing doesn't happen if we critique ourselves at the same time we're writing, right? Yeah. So I think it's...
You end up with a really good sentence or a really good paragraph, but you never get the book written because you're just too focused on that one little part.
Yeah, so I really wanted to make sure that people understand that what you're saying is videotaping yourself and video is really a great tool.
Yes.
But the mirror because we came from a place where we didn't used to have video cameras that were accessible and whatnot. So the mirror was the thing. But do not go with the mirror anymore, folks. Video camera.
Yeah, and I think even just recording yourself, on your phone. I walk in the mornings, or at least I try to, until it gets cold like it is now. But there's trails around the lake and stuff, and so that's my exercise of choice. And if I'm preparing for a presentation, I will take my phone and record the story or whatever it is that I'm working on in the phone while I'm walking. And then I come back and I listen to it. And that helps me in terms of timing, because then I know exactly how long it was, number one. And in terms of where I should or shouldn't pause. And I learned that from Warren. He was not a natural speaker. As I said, I've been talking forever, but he really learned how to script what he wanted to say, down to the number of seconds that he would pause when he knew people were going to laugh. And he always started on time and finished on time and all those things. And it used to infuriate him when we worked together because I was not that structured, but I always quit on time. And he would say, how do you do that? How do you do that? And I said, it's a gift.
There you go. Again, almost like, again, it's the idea of architecting your speech and architecting your
Yeah.
presentation.
And it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing that we sometimes forget is that even though it's different for everybody, we all still have to do it in one way or another. You know, you have to plan out these conversations, and when you're going to show the pictures, and when you're going to show the videos, and what questions are you going to ask, and all those kinds of things. Now, you may or may not have it written down,
Mm-hmm.
but in your brain, you know that, and so I know how to tell stories pretty well. But I still need to rehearse them. I still need to make them appropriate. Oh, that was my very first grandchild. She's 7 now. That was at a basketball game in San Antonio. So there's Charlotte. Charlotte is an amazing young lady. She is just so funny. And she was so tiny. Fun pictures. Now that picture, I have to tell you, the one with Santa Claus is me. The other one is Charlotte. So I think there's a bit of a family resemblance. So we made that just for fun. I was 3. Charlotte was 5 months. But we have the same facial expression, so I don't know what that means. And that is Charlotte and my son with her new baby brother. So he's almost 3 now. But so family is pretty important, and I am now watching my grandchildren grow up online. Same mouth. And she talks as much as her grandmother, so there you go.
Fantastic.
They call me Tutu, which is grandma in Hawaiian.
All right.
My son grew up in Hawaii, so that's kind of where that came from. But I have to tell you a quick, cute story about Charlotte. When she turned 7 this last spring, she informed me that when I call, that she wasn't going to have time to talk to me, because she was, not only was she 7, but she was getting ready to go into grade 2. And she had to focus, and she had to do projects, and she was going on and on. And I said, okay. And so sure enough, she would wave from time to time whenever I'm on FaceTime or whatever with them, until after the first lockdown, and we all had issues with our hair and all those things because we couldn't get our hair cut. So my hair, which you saw in many of those things, was red. And as it grew out, it was not red anymore. And so we went to this, and Charlotte didn't know that. And she was running from one room to the next. I was talking to my son, and he was in the foreground. She's in the back of the room running across, and it was just like a cartoon. She stopped like I don't know, some cartoon characters when they're running really fast and they just stop on a dime and their eyes get really big, and her eyes got really big, and she goes, "Tutu, your hair's white. What happened?" I was laughing really hard, but anyway, we managed. And then the next week, I asked my son, I said, "What's a good time to call on the following day?" And he said, "Well, Charlotte says 10:20 a.m. So I called at 10:20 a.m. and bless her little heart, she came charging up, and she grabbed the phone, and she went upstairs, and she sat on the carpet, and we talked for over 2 hours. It was the first time I really talked to her in months. And she told me all about going to school online and about what she wanted for Christmas, and that she had a cavity, but it was okay because it was in a baby tooth, and on and on and on and on she went. And we just had a lovely time. So I guess she felt bad that she'd been ignoring me, or maybe she thought that I was getting so old that my hair was white and she didn't have much time left with me or something. I don't know, but anyway, we had a good time.
I love it. Love it. So tell us about this photo. We haven't.
Yeah, that's a friend of mine who is from New Zealand. That picture was taken in Barcelona, Spain. It was an international conference that I was speaking at. And Janet and I were reunited there. I had met her at some other conference, I think in Washington, D.C. or someplace. And so we got together. We did a little sightseeing together, and it was a lovely week. She lives in Wellington in New Zealand.
I love this photo of you and Warren. My wife, she's half Irish and half Welsh, and she always said, that she doesn't really like travel, but she would love to go to, Scotland one of these days. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of lovely places in the world. I just feel very privileged to have had so many global kinds of opportunities to go and to meet people. And the nice thing is I have, now I have friends all around the planet, and that's pretty special. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Now, I wanted to ask you a different question here, and that is, when I reach out and say, "Hey, Susan, I know you're busy, but would you like to come on and chat for an hour and a bit?" And were there areas that you wanted to share that we haven't gotten to yet, my friend? I still have some questions for you, but I just want to pause for a moment and say,
well,
are there areas that you want to share?
No, not really. I mean, you've been very, very kind to let me babble on and on, which I'm pretty good at. I don't always make sense, but I can talk. So no, I don't think so. I think that, at this particular time of the year when the holidays are upon us, and when we usually get to spend time with our families, and now some of us won't, that there's still so many things to be grateful for. And I personally am grateful for the friends and the family that I have, and the fact that they're scattered around the planet is a bonus as far as I'm concerned. That picture, just so you know, my mother was 98 and she remarried. So that was her new husband, Bill, who was a lovely man. And they had a couple of years together, and then he passed away. And then 6 months later, she did. But
wow, I just want to pause on that. Again, folks who are watching, hopefully you didn't miss that. And that is, at the age of 98, she decided to get married. I mean, that's just an example of how, the world is what you choose to focus on, right? Yeah. Some people would say, I checked out at a certain age and I just don't want to get into that. I mean, here's a person who says, she wants to get married, and 98 or 99 or 100, that's going to happen.
Well, she as I've indicated earlier, she's a pretty amazing woman. I used to call her every day for probably the last, 6 or 8 years of her life. And my dad passed away 11 years before she remarried. So she lived in a retirement community, and she was still active and all of that. But I called, and my brother called in the morning. I called in the afternoon. And while Mom didn't have Alzheimer's, she did have problems with short-term memory the older she got. And so she would remember that my brother called, So he was the golden child. And every day she would say, well, where have you been, honey? You know, because when she talked to me, she didn't remember that I called the day before, which was fine. So we were talking on a Sunday, and in the middle of the conversation, she said, so what would you think if I got married? And I said, I don't know, Mom, what would you think? And she said, I don't think it's a very good idea. And I said, then don't do it. She said, okay. And we went on with our conversation. The next day, we had the same conversation, except she mentioned Bill. And she said, well, you've met Bill. And he comes and he lives down the hall and he comes and he visits. And I said, yeah, I know. He's a very nice man. And she said, but, you know, sometimes I have to tell him to go home. And I said, well, Mom, if you marry him, he'll be home. You can't send him away after that. She said, oh, that's right. So the next day, Bill wasn't even on her radar, nothing. We just had a regular conversation. On Wednesday, I called and she said, I knew when she answered the phone, there was something wrong. And I said, Mom, what's going on? She said, there's a bunch of people here and they're telling me that I can't do what I want to do. And I said, what do you want to do? She said, I want to get married. And I said, well, who's there? And so she, you know, her best friend and the pastor of her church and the head of the retirement center and all these people. And I said, well, Mom, you didn't want to get married yesterday. And she said, I know, that's what they told me, but today I want to get married. And I said, well, Mom, you're 98. If you can't make up your own mind by now, I don't know what to tell you. So she said, okay. And she hung up. So the next day, Thursday, I called and called and called and called and nobody answered. Finally, she answered and I said, Mom, where have you been? You know, like I'm the parent, right? And she said, well, Bill and I went to get our marriage license. And I said, oh, and she said, and they're very busy there. You know, they have hunting license and fishing. I said, Mom, did you get the right one? She said, I don't know. You'll have to ask Bill. And I said, oh, well, that's good. I said, when's the wedding? Tomorrow at 2 p.m. So I said, Mom, I don't think I can be there. She said, they're taking pictures. It's okay. So it was just funny. See, they both went to the same church. They wanted their pastor to marry them. And he said, well, I have a rule. And they said, what do you mean? He said, anybody that I marry has to go to marriage counseling for 6 months. And Mom said, we could be dead by then. And he wouldn't marry them. So there was another person that lived in the retirement center, a retired bishop. And so he said, I'll marry you. So he was in his robe with the mitered cap and the whole thing, you know. My dad was a Southern Baptist minister, not a lot of pomp and circumstance. My mother in the pictures looked like a deer in the headlights when she saw the bishop. But he married him, and they had a lovely couple of years together, and I was really happy for her. But and the funny part was at the 100th birthday, Warren went and talked. We had never met Bill's kids. He had 3 kids. So they were there. And of course, all my siblings and my son and everybody was there for Mom. And so Warren was talking with Bill's family. And they told exactly the same story that I just told you, only from Bill's side of the thing. Like, so I guess they were well suited.
Oh, wow. That is a special and unique story. And thank you for sharing that. And so you said she made 100 and beyond. Did I get that correctly? Wow. Yeah.
She was 101 when she died. 101.
Yeah. Wow.
She turned 101 in August, and she died the following October. So
101. So let me just go back in time now that was a few years ago. So in fact, she was alive when we had the Spanish flu, 1918.
Yes. She was born in 1910.
Yeah. So she was 8 years old during the wow.
Yeah. But she had polio as a child, and she wore braces and walked with crutches and all of that till she was 12. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure during that time, which quite honestly, I'd never even thought about her being alive when the Spanish flu was, but I'm pretty sure they they were probably monitoring her pretty closely because she was still very handicapped, I guess is the best way to say that in terms of getting around. But
my sister had contracted polio way back when, and so now in her 50s, still, of course, paralyzed in the one leg, right? So, I mean, polio was pervasive.
Yeah, it was
back then.
Yeah.
So that is a really powerful and unique story about here's somebody who have really seen 2 different centuries, and
she was amazing in that she loved to travel, as did my grandmother. I come from a long line of gypsies, I think. But anyway, and she'd been to many places and flown to, and done a lot of speaking in terms of some of the church work that she did with my dad. And so she didn't fly a lot internationally, but we moved around a lot when I was young, and my older siblings all said that Daddy had an itching foot and blamed it on the Lord, because every time we moved, it was the Lord's will. And sometimes his will was very quick. We'd spend a year and then off we go again. So I went to 10 schools in 12 years. Wow. And was very excited to go to university where I'd be at the same school for the entire time.
Yeah, stability is all relative, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is.
Yeah. Now, I want to just spin through some other photos here, some of which we have seen already, but let me know if one sort of catches your attention that they want to speak about, but we've seen many of these photos. But the question I would have for you is, do you have a sentiment to share about, your global travels? And actually, I want to hear from you about this fine gentleman here who I loved. Yeah, absolutely. I love his speech. I listened to the whole keynote many times on DVD. But tell us about this gentleman.
Well, I didn't know Mitchell until I joined the speaking world. But Mitchell was a Marine. He was a private pilot. He had a pilot's license. And after he got out of the Marines, he got this job that he loved, which was he was the conductor, or whatever they're called, for a cable car in San Francisco. And so he had just purchased a brand new motorcycle, and on his day off, another car ran a red light and hit him, and the gas tank exploded. And so he was burned all over his body. He was in the hospital for, I think, a couple of years or something. And, but he was fine once they got all the burns and the grafts and skin grafts and stuff. And so he went back to work, and not as a cable car guy, but he went to, Colorado. He became the mayor for a while of Crested Butte, Colorado. And he was taking some friends on a short flight in his private plane, and something happened, and he had to land very quickly, and kind of a rough landing, bouncing around on this airstrip. His friends all got out and walked away, and he had broken his back. And so then he became a paraplegic. And so he was in his wheelchair there. You can see that his fingers were burned off in the first thing. But he wrote a book called The Man Who Would Not Be Defeated. And it's all about before all this happened to him, he says, I could do 10,000 things. Now I can do 9,000 things. And he's an amazing man. When Warren died, he called me. And he has a home in Santa Barbara, and he also has a home in the islands in Hawaii on Molokai. So he called and he said, if you want to come out, and even if I'm not home, if you just want to get away and come to the islands, you are more than welcome. And so I said, well, I got things that I gotta do here, and I'm going right back to work, and yada yada yada. And then I had a few weeks that I wasn't working in February, And it was really cold here. So I called him and I said, can I come now? And he said, yes. So I flew out to Molokai, and he, bless his heart, he met me at the plane. Now he drives, he does everything. And he has this huge, big old Cadillac, the kind that had the bench seat, and it's a 2-door. So the front seats fold forward. So he met me at the airport. He gave me a flower lei, which I didn't expect, since I never think about that, since I used to live there for 20 years. But anyway, and then we go out to this little parking lot in Molokai, and I see this car, and he says, first of all, you have to put your own luggage in the trunk. I said, I can do that. So I did that. And then he opened the passenger's side of the door, and he said, stand back and be amazed. And so I just stood there and I watched him. He got from his wheelchair into the car on the passenger side. He reached through and he folded up the wheelchair. He then scooted over on that bench enough that he could fold the passenger side seat forward. He maneuvered his folded up wheelchair into the back behind the seat, scooted around, put the back up, scooted over to the driver's side, and he said, you can get in now and you have to close your own door. and away we went. And the everybody on Molokai, which is a small island and not very many people, they all know him, of course, and they all know his car. And it's rigged so that he doesn't have to, it's all hand gears and whatever, so the gas and all that. And so I had a lovely week. I stayed with him in his condo, and he said, if you want to talk, we'll talk. If you want to cry, you can cry. And if you don't want to talk, we won't. And he was just a lovely, lovely friend. And he had been Warren's friend as well. But I had met him very early on in my career as a speaker, because he was often in Hawaii. And so that's how we met. He's a great guy.
Absolutely. And I've seen him a couple of times at the CAPS convention when he was able to join us there. And of course, the story that you've told, again, I've listened to his keynotes a number of times, often, sometimes even when I'm driving from Edmonton to Calgary and back. These speakers, and he was one of them that I kept listening to again and again.
Yeah.
Every time you hear the same story, but next time you actually glean something else out of it that you didn't get.
Yeah,
the first time.
I think that's a gift. He has it, and Captain Jerry Coffey, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for the whole 7 years, he was shot down on his first flight after he got to Vietnam. And he wrote the foreword to my first book. He lives in Hawaii as well. And I've heard them both, and they do basically the same keynote every single time. And every single time I feel like it's brand new. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a gift, because I don't even tell stories the same story, but I don't tell them the same every time. And they both are masters at that. Absolutely. And it sort of goes back to what I said earlier about writing, the difference between writing and speaking. And I was at the Maui Writers Conference several years in a row, but I think it was the very first one. And Jerry Coffey was a keynoter. And so he told his story, and I knew him, and we were good friends, and it was just magical. And then a little later on, during those few days of that conference, Terry Anderson, who had been a prisoner, had been kidnapped in Lebanon, I think it was, and had been a prisoner there until he I don't remember how he got out, but anyway. And he had just finished this huge, big book. I mean, it was really one of those, and it was all about being in captivity and all of that. but he couldn't speak.
Mm.
And it was like he was reading a paper to us. It was almost the exact same experience that Jerry Coffey had had. I mean, obviously in different parts of the world, but both had been prisoners. Both had, been released. Both had survived, but the difference in how they were able to communicate that experience in their life was just like daylight and dark. And it really brought home to me how differently you have to express yourself from verbal to written, even for the same story.
Was it? I'm going to say it, and you might know the name right off the bat. He said long, long ago. He said that the medium is the message.
Marshall McLuhan.
Yes, the medium is the message. He said, and that's a timeless quote, and probably in many ways more relevant now than ever before.
Well, yeah. Look at us. I mean, who would have thunk it, as my mother used to say. But here we are, and we have this. I gripe about I'm watching my grandchildren grow up online, but I am so grateful that we have that, and that I can pretty much very dependably talk to you and see you while I'm talking to you or anybody else on the planet. And it's just so much more helpful to be able to share. And at the same time, I don't know if I've rolled my eyes during our conversation, but people always accuse me of rolling my eyes when I'm speaking from time to time. And so, but that's how you know it's me, I guess, in terms of a clue. And so I think we're just very, very fortunate.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned before that we're not going to get over COVID in terms of completely. We're going to get really a new appreciation on how to deal with this part of our reality, and it's going to be part of our reality for a while. And so the question is, in tough times, just like during the war, what kind of lessons can we learn from it, and how does that modify our own kind of thinking and behavior going forward? Because for the long time, maybe some people were on autopilot. Maybe we take a few things for granted. Certainly, we're not going to take the in-person experience for granted anymore if we did before.
Yeah, I think my hope is that we will have a kinder, gentler world when it's all over. That, or when it's, I don't know that it'll ever be all over, but when it's more stable, and we'll be able to not have as many biases, not have the kinds of injustice, whether it's racial or social or whatever, that seems so dividing and divisive right now in our world. And I love being alive. I love what I do. I love being with my friends and my family, and I love sharing experiences and stories in a variety of ways, whether it's written or verbal or on the phone or across the cyberspace or whatever.
Now, let me ask you this. People who know you somewhat well and who worked with you in the past, do you have a story or two where they would be surprised to learn that aspect of your work and your life and your, do you have a surprise that you tend to kind of...
I'm pretty much an open book, I think, Dune. But I mean, there are some stories from the old the time I spent in Alaska when I was very young and idealistic and thought I was going to save the world and all those kinds of things. And Got stranded on an ice floe one time, and no communication, and it was pretty frightening. But
Now you said an ice flow. I want
yeah.
to sort of pause on that. Describe it a bit more. I don't know if everybody knows what that is.
Well, it wasn't really an ice flow. That's the only way I know to describe it. What happened was we were teaching at a small school just on the beginning of the Alaska Peninsula. It was on a lagoon. It was called Chignik Lagoon, and there were 3 Chigniks. There was Chignik, and then there was Chignik Lagoon, and then you went up this river, and there was a lake, and so there was Chignik Lake. So we had friends that taught at the school at Chignik Lake, and the weather in that part of Alaska is very temperamental. If we got mail once a month, we thought we were in heaven, because the weather was very difficult. And it didn't snow a lot, but lots of wind and lots of rain and all of those kinds of things. So in the spring of that year, our communication between villages was all shortwave radio. I mean, that's all we had. And so we contacted our friends at Chignik Lake and said, we're going to get we had an outboard motor, just a skiff. It wasn't a big deal. And we're going to come up the river because the ice has been floating out of the river, and people are getting through, and thought we'd come up and spend the weekend with you. Yeah, sure, come on. So away we went, and we spent the weekend, and then we needed to come home because we were the only 2 teachers, and you had to have school, and we got down to this part in the river just before the lagoon opened up, and it was called the Narrows. And so there was all the ice that had melted and had come loose from the shore had jammed in this part, and it was solid, and we couldn't. And so my then husband said, we can just power right through. Well, all we did. This should have been an earlier clue for me, but anyway, so we get up on the ice in our little skiff with our outboard motor, and now we're out of the water. I mean, he did power us on the ice, but he couldn't power us off. So I said, well, what are we going to do now? And he said, well, you're lighter than I am, so you need to get out and see how stable the ice is. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, just get out and walk around, and we'll see if it's really stable, or if there's a place that we can pull the boat or whatever. So I'm getting out of this skiff, and he says, wait. And I said, what? And he handed me an oar. Mm-hmm. And I said, what's this for? And he said, well, if you break through the ice and you're carrying this oar, then it'll catch you and you won't go under the water. And I'm like, oh, thanks a lot. So anyway, long story short, we couldn't get out, and all we could do was hope that we could get back, drag this very old wooden boat that was waterlogged from years that somebody had given us, and get it back off the ice and into the river, so we could go back up the river. Now the tide was coming out. There wasn't going to be enough water in the river, and we had all these issues. We finally got it in the water, but there wasn't enough water to maneuver it. So we just had to pull it ourselves and walk. And we had these fishing wader kind of boots on, but I've never been so cold. I mean, I was dying, and my hands were turning blue, and my gloves were wet, and just everything was awful. And the only thing we were praying for was that our friends would hopefully send somebody to look for us, because we hadn't radioed back that we had made it home. And it was getting dark, and of course nobody could look for us when we were getting dark. And I was trying not to think about the moose or the wolverines or the bears that were in the woods. And it was just awful. And just as we're just struggling, and we heard this motor, and they had some of the guys from the village at the lake came and rescued us, and they put me in their boat, and I don't know what happened with ours. I don't remember that part, but I didn't think I would ever get warm. And we stayed there for like 3 or 4 more days or something before we could actually get back through, and all that ice was broken up enough that we could get home. It was awful.
As they say, your perception of reality influenced the life that you live. And I guess when we underestimate how big that ice thing is, yeah.
Yeah, well, who knew?
Thank you for sharing that. Now, as we round the corner and wrapping up, I want to say a couple of things. One is, if you have yet another story that you want to share, feel free. But also, I don't know if are you into singing, Susan?
No, I can't sing. Can't carry a tune in a bucket.
Okay. Are you into reciting poetry? Are you into that?
To be a long time ago. I haven't done it for years.
Yeah. Now, the reason I mentioned that is soon here we'll wrap up, and I'll have you kind of take us home with whatever you want to share, whatever kind of summarizing or concluding thoughts. And if you want to sing a song or cite poetry, feel free. But before we go there, I just want to again say thank you for joining us for what turned out to be a pretty extended conversation here. And I really enjoy learning more about you. And I know folks who do know you, whether it's CAPS or other circles that you operate in, will enjoy some of the stories that you've shared over the time that we had here. So thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Yep. And so to our viewers, please, if you have comments or questions for Susan, even after the live show here, go ahead and chiming in the comment section, and I'll make sure that Susan can see them and respond to them as appropriate. But thank you, folks, for joining us on an hour and a bit here of really conversation with Susan. And again, you've been listening to Susan Luke Evans, and just a diverse set of experience to share, and many stories to share, and an expert on again, leadership, an expert on communication, expert on storytelling and legacy. So the idea is, as leaders of organizations and communities, what kind of legacy do you want to leave with your people, and how do you do that through communication, and how do you do that through storytelling, and how do you do that through effective leadership? So thank you, Susan. I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend. And when we're done, hang in the green room for just a minute there. I'll give you a high five in there. But it's yours, my friend. Take as long as you like, and be as brief as you like. It's yours to take us home, my friend.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I would just like to say that in addition to all the goofiness in my life, I think that legacy has become very, well, obviously the older you get, the more you pay attention to things like that. But one of the things that I have learned is that we all build and leave a legacy, whether by design or whether by accident. And if we can do it more consciously, then we can not only influence at a higher level, but we can communicate through our own personal experiences, things that nobody else can communicate in the same way. And while you may not have had the same experiences I've had, and I may not have had the ones that you've had, we can find commonalities, and we can find opportunities to share those experiences and share those ideas, so that we both grow as we continue to learn, and we can hopefully come out of all the madness that is happening at this point in our world as a kinder, gentler world, where we care more about people than we do about things, and where we know that we are influencing people to be better tomorrow than they are today.